A lot of producers think if they get a placement with 100 million streams, they're going to be able to buy their mom a new crib, get a new whip, or even just quit their day job. But that is far from the case. In this video, I'll be explaining all the ways you might generate money from your placements and how much you can expect to make from each of those revenue streams. That way you go into your first placement prepared, don't have any unrealistic expectations, and know what royalties need to be collected. I'm Daniel Cruz Hernandez, music law paralegal and founder of Producer Royalties. My team and I have recovered millions of dollars in royalties for producers, worked with every major label, and have cleared records with some of the biggest artists in the world, such as Drake, Rihanna, Kanye West, and Jay-Z. Every day we're in the trenches dealing with the same problems and cases, many of which the producer could have avoided if they knew just a little bit more about the business side. So we built this platform to ungatekeep all the information that labels, artists, and lawyers don't want producers to know. I've seen the contracts and the statements from hundreds of placements, so might know better than anybody how much you might expect to make from your placement. So let's get into it. So to understand how much producers really make from their placements, we have to first understand the main royalty streams that their placement might generate. If you watch these videos, you know that I love this chart by BeatStars that shows each of the revenue streams and who to sign up with to collect each of them. On the left side is the sound recording, aka the master recording copyright, and the royalties that it generates. And on the right side is the composition copyright, aka the publishing and its royalties. If you don't understand the difference between these two copyrights, then I highly suggest watching this video right here, because understanding that there are two copyrights is the most foundational thing to understand about the music business, since all of the money flows from one of the two copyrights related to a song. So we're gonna start on the left side of this chart underneath the sound recording copyright, and actually going to start with the revenue stream that's not on here, because this is a chart focused specifically on royalties, which is what you'll make on the back end. And that first revenue stream is the advance or upfront fee that the producer could get from their placement. Whenever you get a placement, you should be looking for some type of advance or upfront fee, and that upfront fee is typically an advance. An advance is a prepayment of master royalties, meaning it's the artist giving you master royalties that you might generate upfront, and you won't be entitled to more master royalties until that advance recoups. But sometimes that upfront fee they give you isn't an advance, it's a non-recoupable fee, which means that it does not need to recoup before you get more master royalties, and you could get master royalties much sooner. If it's a non-recoupable fee, the expenses from the song or album typically have to recoup before you get master royalties. So let's talk about how much you might receive as an advance. Well, 95% of what my team and I handle is placements with major label artists, and we've cleared hundreds of songs and seen the contracts for hundreds of more songs. So we've seen the highest and the lowest advances that are out there. If you're working with a C-level artist signed to a major label, guys like Babytron, La Tyler, or YTB Fat, you're probably only gonna get somewhere between a $1,000 and $3,000 all-in fee. I'm gonna be saying this phrase a lot, the phrase all in a lot of these videos, and what this means is the total amount that all the producers on the song will receive. So if you get proposed a $1,000 all-in fee and there's 4 producers, that would mean each producer would receive $250, unless they agree to split it unequally. For a newly signed artist that gets less than 1 million streams on a song, they might offer you $500 or less to clear the beat. And then there's artists signed to indie distribution deals as well too. The most common indie distributors you might see are Empire, Create Music Group, 1RPM, Simple Stupid, and The Orchard. Advances from these indie distributors could range between $500 to $2,000, but they could also go a lot higher as well. And what's important to know is that these distributors often don't give the artist a budget specifically to clear producer clearances. So the artist might have to pay out of pocket for those advances, which makes it a lot more difficult to negotiate with them sometimes. So again, if you're working with a C-level artist or an artist signed to an indie distributor, then you might get somewhere between $500 to maybe $2,500. Then with B-level artists like an NBA Youngboy, a Lil TJ, or a Key Glock, you might receive somewhere between a $2,500 and a $10,000 advance. And with an A-level artist, with a Drake, Kendrick Lamar, or a Travis Scott, you could receive a $10,000 to $20,000 advance, and it could go a lot higher than that as well. But of course, depending on your catalog and who your co-producers are, you might be able to demand a lot more than this. For instance, we worked with a producer that got a placement with Tay Keith for a small song that really only generated about 2 million Spotify streams. And since they were on the same song as Tay Keith, they were able to get a $15,000 all-in advance, even though it was the producer's first placement. If it were only that producer on the beat, they probably would have only gotten about $5,000, or would have got lucky if they got $5,000. So getting that big co-producer on the song could really increase the amount you're able to ask for. So that's how much you might make when working with a major label artist. With independent artists, the advance could really be anything. We've all seen producers selling beats on BeatStars for $1 each, like 20 beats for $20. But these are typically beat leases, which means that you're retaining the right to keep selling the same beat to other people. I've seen exclusive licenses for beats sold to indie artists be sold for $2,000 to $4,000. I haven't really seen more than that myself, and it probably would be unreasonable to ask for more than this unless you expect the song to get tens of millions of streams. But either way, when working with independent artists, I would suggest just being relatively flexible with the price price that you sell it for. I know a lot of producers like to brag about the minimum amount they might sell their beats for, but those are often the same producers that struggle to build relationships with upcoming artists. So my suggestion with independent artists is to not focus on the upfront bag and to look for a much higher royalty on the master, probably, which we'll talk about in a second, and getting your music heard by as many people as possible. So we talked about your advance. The next revenue stream that we'll focus on is your master royalty, or your sound recording royalty. And this would also be under the sound recording or master recording copyright on the BeatStars chart. There's really no official name for this royalty we're talking about, but what we are talking about is all the revenue that gets generated from the master recording that the record label or the distributor would collect. And this is what goes into the master royalty. And this can include streams, downloads, physical sales, or anything like that. And since the label owns or controls the master, they are supposed to collect all of the income that the master generates and then pay out the artist or the producer their percentage. And if the song was released independently, then the artist or whoever owns or controls the master would most likely be collecting that money and paying out the producer, or at least they're supposed to be the ones doing that, unless they register your master royalty directly with their distributor, which is always something what we recommend with indie releases. Then the distributor would pay you out your percentage. So if they're releasing through DistroKid, you have your split registered with DistroKid. But collecting master royalties from major labels can be extremely difficult and complicated, which is why we actually built a whole business around collecting master royalties for producers. And we'll talk about the process for collecting these royalties in another video, because the focus of this video is specifically how much is generated from these royalties. But if you do want to learn how to collect master royalties now, then you could check out our course called the Placement Playbook, where we break down all 7 steps of the placement process, teach you how to negotiate the best terms, and to collect all your royalties that your placement generates. So if you're interested in that, click the link below. But now let's talk about how much you can expect to make from your master royalties. With major label placements, this is the best, most accurate estimate you're going to find anywhere else online. We analyze billions and billions and billions of streams worth of data, and here's the best estimate that our team has come up with. If you have a 1% master royalty and the song generates 100 million streams on Spotify, then you will most likely be owed $10,000 in master royalties. So if you have 3 points, 3 master royalty points, which is standard for major label placements, and the song has 100 million on Spotify, then you'd be owed about $30,000 in master royalties. But this really does depend on how much you received as an advance, because remember, the advance is a prepayment of master royalties, and it has to recoup before you get more master royalties. So if you got a $100,000 advance and the song has generated 100 million streams, then you wouldn't be owed any master royalties. But if you got no advance and the song generated maybe 20 million streams, then you might be owed some master royalties. Now, you must also keep in mind that this number is influenced by a lot of different factors. For instance, if somebody streams a song in India, then it'll be worth a lot less than it would be if the streams came from the United States. Apple Music streams are worth more, I think about double than Spotify streams, and accounts under a family plan are worth less than a normal account. But still, after analyzing billions of streams, that is the best estimate that we came up with. And to be clear, with this estimate, when a song has 100 million streams on Spotify, this is how much they're usually owed. We're not saying 100 million streams on Spotify will generate that. We're saying songs with 100 million streams on Spotify, including all the other revenue that that song might make on other platforms, including Apple Music and YouTube, will generate about $10,000 in master royalties per 1 point. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, the next stream producers might receive from their placements is what's called digital performance royalties. Again, this is under the master recording, the sound recording copyright on the BeatStars chart. You may have heard of the organization Sound Exchange before. Well, Sound Exchange was created by the United States government specifically to collect digital performance royalties. And digital performance royalties are generated from internet radio stations like Pandora, SiriusXM, and iHeartRadio. Now, I do always encourage producers to understand Sound Exchange and know how to get your Sound Exchange royalties collected. I actually made an entire video on how to collect Sound Exchange royalties, which you can check out right here. But I would not be counting your dollars from Sound Exchange, because in order to get a meaningful amount of Sound Exchange royalties, the song would have to be pretty massive. We worked on collecting Sound Exchange from huge records with tens or hundreds of millions of streams, and there wasn't more than a couple hundred or a couple $1,000s in there to collect for the producer. I always tell people, if the song isn't big enough to be played on terrestrial radio, then it's probably not big enough to be played on internet radio either, or at least enough to be played to generate a good amount of Sound Exchange royalties. So again, I wouldn't be counting your dollars from Sound Exchange unless it's a really huge record. And there's one more bucket on the left side of the BeatStars chart, which is synchronizations. Whenever music is paired with a visual recording, like in a movie or in a video game or advertisement or anything like that, the person who used the music is supposed to get a sync license to use that song. And these licenses can vary. Some of them pay a large fee up front, some of them only pay royalties on the back end, and a lot of them pay both. Usually, syncs pay the master recording side and the publishing side the same amount of money. So when a sync company reaches out to clear a record, they might say something like, we're proposing $15,000 per side, which means $15,000 to the master recording owners and $15,000 to the publishing owners. And since producers on major label placements usually only get 3% as a master royalty, but typically get 50% publishing, producers will make a lot more on the publishing side from syncs. And any revenue that the master does generate from syncs would be collected by the label and then applied towards recouping the producer's advance. So really, you probably wouldn't even notice any money coming from a sync on the master side. So how much do sync companies pay? Well, it of course really depends. We've seen major footwear companies like Nike or Adidas pay $15,000 per side, but they can also pay a lot more or less depending on how much they're promoting this commercial or how big the song is. If it's a Super Bowl commercial, then you're probably going to get 6 figures for it. But if it's just a regular YouTube ad, then they're probably not going to pay $15,000 for it. And if your music is used in a major Hollywood movie, you might get $50,000 to $100,000 per side plus royalties on the back end. So that's what you might make on the master side. Now let's put some real numbers on it so you have some reference on how much you might make from a replacement. Let's assume a producer gets the standard terms from a B-level major label artist on the master side, which might be a $5,000 advance and a 3% master royalty. If the song has 100 million streams on Spotify, then they most likely made a $5,000 advance since it's a B-level artist, $30,000 in master royalties, plus maybe $1,000 in sound exchange royalties, which would be about $36,000 total that they made on the master side. And if there are multiple producers on the beat, then that number would be divided by how many producers are on there. And remember, if you do hire a company like us, then we would probably be able to negotiate you a higher advance and potentially a higher master royalty and make sure that your sound exchange is being collected. So that's the master side. Now let's talk about how much a producer might make on the publishing side. There are 3 revenue streams underneath the composition side of the BeatStars chart. They are public performance royalties, mechanical royalties, and synchronizations again. Both public performance royalties and mechanical royalties are generated from streams. And about 10% of streaming income goes to both. So every time Spotify pays out $100, around $10 goes to performance royalties, $10 goes to mechanical royalties. But how much can a producer really expect to make from streams? Well, the best estimate that's floating around is about $1,000 goes to publishing owners for every 1 million streams. So if you have 50% publishing on a song, you might get $500 in publishing royalties for those 1 million streams, or $250 in mechanical royalties and $250 in performance royalties. But again, just like master royalties, this depends on where the streams came from, like what kind of account the person has, how much they're paying for their membership, and things like that. But this is just the money from streams. Publishing gets generated from a lot more than just streams. Performance royalties are generated every time your music is played in a public setting, like in a restaurant, in the elevator, or in a live concert. Every venue that plays live music is supposed to pay what's called a blanket license to the performing rights organizations every year in order to have the rights to play those songs in their venue. And the larger the venue is, the more they have to pay. For instance, you'll generate hundreds of times more from your music being played in a massive stadium like Madison Square Garden rather than your music being played in the elevator. I'm going to give you an example of some numbers I saw before. In the UK, PRS, who's the performing rights organization out there, calculates about £10 per show for non-ticketed gigs like cafes and pubs, or at least 4% of box office sales for ticketed venues for any size. And that's how much will go to the publishing owners. And then that 4% is divided among all of the songs performed at that venue and split 80% to headliners and 20% to openers. So this is an example of how publishing in certain countries is calculated differently than publishing in other countries. Really, every country and territory has their own unique laws and regulations around publishing. To bring it back to this example, I've recently heard that an opener for a big arena tour in Europe played just 4 songs a night, and they were making about £9,000, which is about $11,000 per night in performance royalties from those 4 songs. So I wanted to share this to emphasize that you shouldn't be thinking about money just from streams when you think about publishing. Performance royalties are generated again from live performances, but also when music is played on the radio too. Radio stations are supposed to report what songs they're playing and then pay an amount to the performing rights organizations as well. And music played on the radio can generate a ton of money in performance royalties as well. So that's a bit about performance royalties. Then for mechanical royalties, those are generated from streams like we talked about, but also from digital downloads and physical sales and other types of reproductions of the record as well. But really, streams are the main way that mechanical royalties are generated nowadays because people don't buy music like they used to. Then the third revenue stream that you might generate on the publishing side, again, is syncs. But we already covered all the main things you need to know about syncs in the master recording section, so I'm not going to cover it again. So like I emphasized, there are a lot of factors at play that will determine how much you'll receive in publishing, but it also takes a long time for your publishing money to come in. A lot of people think you just have to register the song and then the money will start flowing in right away, but on average, it'll take about 6 months for that money to start coming in, and about a year for the largest chunk of that money to be sent to you or your publisher. One of our producers had a song with hundreds of millions of streams out in India, and in 2 years, it only generated a couple $100. And then after those 2 years, tens of thousands of dollars started flowing in randomly. So how long it takes to get paid your publishing royalties could really depend, and it really also depends depends on what publisher you're signing with as well. We didn't talk much about publishers in this video, but a publisher's job is to register you with all the organizations worldwide that collect your publishing royalties. And there are about 200 PROs and societies around the world that each operate differently. So your publisher is responsible for ensuring that your songs are set up with all the main ones that your catalog is generating royalties in. Some publishers take months or years to register your music. Some don't register their writer's music at all, or only register their biggest writer's music. Some take forever to resolve split disputes, and some only register you with a few collection societies. So if two publishers both have an 80-20 split, that does not mean you're going to generate the same amount in publishing royalties from each of them. If you want to learn more about publishers and how they operate, check out this video right here where I break down everything a producer needs to know about publishing deals, or at least the main things. But to summarize, what you get paid out and when you get paid out can vary significantly when it comes to publishing. Unfortunately, publishing is extremely unpredictable and you just have to be patient. But as you get more and more records, these numbers are going to start to stack up, and before you know it, you're not going to be counting dollars in the same way that you did when you only had a couple placements. And that's the value of having a catalog. So even though publishing is unpredictable, I'm going to put some numbers on it so you have some reference on how much you might make. If the song has 100 million streams on Spotify and you have 50% publishing, which is the standard in the US for hip hop songs, then you might generate about $25,000 in mechanical royalties, $25,000 in performance royalties, and then if the song is played a little bit on the radio, you might get another $10,000 from radio play. And maybe you'll get another $10,000 from songs being played in a public setting, which generates you about $70,000 in publishing royalties. And on the master side, like we said before, you might get about $36,000, bringing the total that you made from a song with 100 million streams on Spotify to about $103,000. If you like this video, then please hit subscribe and share this with a friend so we could help get this information out to as many producers as possible. And if you're a producer who really wants to ensure that you're getting paid as much as possible from your placements and handling your placements the right way, check out our course, The Placement Playbook, where we break down all 7 steps of the placement process, teach you how to negotiate the best terms, how to collect all your royalties, and basically demand the industry's respect. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.